What if the person you think you are never truly existed? It sounds absurd, maybe even offensive, because everything you've ever known begins with the certainty of I. Your name, your memories, the emotions you cling to, the goals you chase, the stories you tell yourself late at night, all of them orbit around this idea of a stable, permanent self. You wake up in the morning believing you are the same person you were yesterday. You go to work or school, talk to people, argue, love, hate, and dream, always assuming there is an unchanging you at the center of it all. But what if that you is nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion? Consider this. From the moment you were born, before you even had the ability to think, you were being programmed. A name was given to you. A culture wrapped itself around you. A language embedded itself into your brain, shaping not only how you speak, but how you think. Every story you were told, every belief handed to you by parents, teachers, and society became bricks in the invisible prison of your identity. You were taught who you are, long before you had the chance to question it. And so, you live as if you were a solid being, unaware that most of what you call yourself is not truly yours. Your favorite food, your taste in music, even your deepest values, how much of it was chosen freely, and how much was given to you by the world around you. Imagine your daily routine. You wake up, reach for your phone, scroll through endless streams of information. You drink your coffee, head out to work or school, answer emails, sit in traffic, make plans for the weekend. Everything feels ordinary, predictable, even safe. But underneath this familiarity lies a disturbing truth. You may simply be acting out a script written for you. A script so deeply embedded that you never realize you're playing a role. This illusion of self is powerful because it creates the illusion of control. We believe we are the authors of our lives. We believe our choices spring from some inner essence called me. Yet psychology, neuroscience, and philosophy all converge on a darker conclusion. The self is not a fixed thing, but a story told by the mind, a narrative stitched together from fragments of memory, desire, and fear. And like any story, it can be edited, manipulated, even erased. Think about it. When you lose your memory, who are you? When your personality changes after trauma, were you ever truly stable to begin with? When your emotions hijack your decisions, is it really you making the choice? The more you dig, the more slippery the self becomes, and beneath it all lurks one force that shapes everything, often without our awareness: death. The terror of mortality silently directs our lives, pushing us to create identities, chase goals, and cling to meaning as if these fragile constructs could shield us from the inevitable. Our lives become masks we wear to protect ourselves from the unbearable truth that we are temporary. So, I'll ask again, what if the person you think you are never truly existed? Because if who you are is nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion, built from fear, memory, and social conditioning, then we are faced with a haunting question. If who we think we are is a lie, then what are we really? To understand why the person you think you are may not truly exist, we first need to ask, where did this self come from in the first place? Because the truth is, the self is not some timeless essence, but rather a human invention, a psychological construction that emerged for one simple reason: survival. Picture early humans wandering across dangerous landscapes thousands of years ago, surrounded by predators, starvation, and rival tribes. Survival depended on drawing clear boundaries. There had to be a distinction between me and the world, between my tribe and the other tribe. Out of necessity, the mind began to carve reality into categories. This sense of I, fragile, defensive, but persistent, became the organizing principle that kept us alive. The invention of the self was less about truth and more about safety. As societies grew, this primitive sense of identity evolved into something far more complex: Philosophers have wrestled with it for centuries. Descartes famously declared, "I think, therefore I am," suggesting that consciousness itself was proof of existence. But others, like Nietzsche, warned that this was a trap, that the I we cling to is nothing more than a grammatical fiction, a word we mistake for reality. Psychology later deepened the debate. Freud described the ego as a fragile mediator between primal drives and social expectations, constantly negotiating a balance to preserve the illusion of a stable self. Jung introduced the concept of the persona, the mask we wear for society. According to him, much of who we believe ourselves to be is nothing more than a costume stitched together to earn approval and avoid rejection. Neuroscience has taken it even further, revealing that what we call the self is a story the brain tells itself, a narrative stitched together from memory, emotion, and perception, constantly being updated in real time. But here is the unsettling truth. If identity is just a story, then who is the author? For most of us, the answer is not ourselves. Children do not come into the world with fully formed selves. They inherit fragments from parents, absorb roles from schools, mimic patterns from religions, and imitate archetypes projected by television, movies, and social media. A child is told, "You are this," long before they can decide for themselves. They are assigned a name, a gender, a culture, and a set of values. And slowly, this scaffolding hardens into a personality. Imagine a boy told he must be strong, unemotional, and dominant. Or a girl taught that her worth is measured in beauty or obedience. Imagine someone born into a culture of scarcity, where every decision is shaped by fear of poverty, or another raised in a culture of abundance, where entitlement is disguised as confidence. None of these identities are inherent truths. They are scripts written by forces outside the individual, scripts that shape the rest of their lives. And yet, we rarely pause to question how much of us was chosen and how much was imposed. Think of how even your accent, your sense of humor, your moral convictions are tied to where you were born, what you were taught, and what you unconsciously absorbed. Strip those away, and the self begins to dissolve. The illusion, however, is maintained through language. When we say, "I am angry," or "I am successful," we fuse momentary states or external conditions with the permanent sense of self. But neuroscience suggests there is no permanent self inside us, just neurons firing, sensations passing, stories being told and retold. We mistake the narrative for the narrator. Even trauma reveals this instability. A single violent event can rewire someone's personality. A lifetime of neglect can create an identity rooted in shame. On the surface, this person seems like a solid self, but in reality, they are a collection of wounds, reactions, and coping mechanisms disguised as a stable identity. The more you investigate the self, the less real it becomes. And yet, paradoxically, this illusion feels inescapable, because without it, how would we function? How would we navigate the world without a mask, without a name, without a story to cling to? But what if the very thing that kept our ancestors alive has now become a prison, a mask so convincing that we forget we are wearing it? The self may have started as a survival mechanism, but today it binds us to roles we never consciously chose, identities that limit us, and masks that separate us from our true nature. So, when you look in the mirror and say, "This is who I am," ask yourself, is it really? Or are you simply reciting a story written long before you had the chance to decide? If identity is a story, and if most of that story was written by forces outside of us, then the haunting question remains. If the self is not real, then what is left once the mask falls away? Beneath the surface of everything we do lies a truth so unbearable, so overwhelming, that most of us spend our entire lives avoiding it. The fact that one day, we will die. Unlike other creatures, humans live with a constant awareness of mortality. A cat, a bird, a lion, they experience danger, They feel pain, but they do not spend their lives haunted by the certainty of an inevitable end. We do. From the moment a child first learns what death means, their mind is never truly free of it again. Every joy, every plan, every relationship carries within it the shadow of an ending. Ernest Becker, in his groundbreaking book The Denial of Death, argued that this awareness is the hidden engine behind all of civilization. He claimed that the terror of mortality is so great that we build entire systems, cultures, and worldviews just to keep it buried. Death, in this sense, is not just the end of life. It is the silent author of human behavior. Look at history, and the fingerprints of death are everywhere. The pyramids of Egypt rise like stone prayers to immortality, monuments designed to preserve pharaohs against decay. Medieval cathedrals in Europe towered above cities as reminders of salvation and eternal life, offering comfort to believers who feared the grave. Even the great works of art, literature, and philosophy can be seen as defiance against mortality attempts to carve permanence out of a fleeting existence. But the denial of death doesn't just shape religion or art. It permeates politics, economics, and even consumerism. Nations build myths of eternal glory, convincing citizens that to die for the homeland is to live forever in history. Corporations exploit our mortality by promising youth, beauty, and longevity through products and lifestyles. The self-help industry thrives by selling us the illusion of control, assuring us that, with the right habits, the right legacy plan, we can outwit the silence of the grave. Our personal lives are no different. Why do we crave recognition, status, wealth? Becker argued, it is because, deep down, we know we will die, and so we try to inscribe ourselves into something larger, something permanent. We chase careers, we build families, we collect trophies, we seek followers online, all as unconscious attempts to leave a mark, to say, I was here, and I mattered. But this frantic chase has a darker side. Because when identity and meaning are built on the denial of death, they can never be stable. They demand constant reinforcement. If our self-worth depends on achievements or social validation, we become slaves to anxiety, haunted by the suspicion that it will never be enough. If our identity is built on national or religious myths, we become vulnerable to manipulation, even violence. In service of something that promises immortality, wars have been fought, empires have risen and collapsed, entire civilizations have sacrificed millions, all in the desperate attempt to silence the terror of death. And yet, despite these defenses, death never leaves us. It lurks in every hospital hallway, in every funeral, in every wrinkle and heartbeat. Even in moments of joy, it is there, whispering that time is running out. We may deny it, repress it, distract ourselves with endless consumption, but death remains the quiet architect, shaping the foundations of our lives. Think of the obsession with legacy in the modern age. We speak of building empires, writing books, leaving behind children, creating content that lasts forever online. But forever is an illusion. Servers crash, books burn, names fade from memory. The legacies of emperors once feared a cross. Continents are now reduced to footnotes in history books. The denial of death can give meaning, but it also enslaves us to illusions that collapse as soon as we confront them honestly. What if, instead of running from death, we faced it directly? What if the truth of our mortality wasn't something to be denied, but something to be embraced? The thought is terrifying, but also liberating. If everything ends, then perhaps the value of life is not in its permanence, but in its immediacy. Perhaps death strips away the illusions of status, legacy, and control, forcing us to see what truly matters. The question is whether we are brave enough to confront it, because the alternative is to live in the shadows of denial, letting fear dictate our choices, our identities, our societies. To live without ever truly living, so the unsettling possibility remains. What if death isn't the enemy we think it is? What if death is not the end, but the ultimate truth of who we are? the silent companion reminding us that the self is fragile, the world is fleeting, and existence itself is more mysterious than we dare to admit. If that is true, then the denial of death is not just a mistake, it is the greatest illusion of all. If the fear of death silently shapes the foundations of our lives, then society has long since learned how to weaponize that fear. The result is a prison so subtle, so invisible, that most of us never realize we are locked inside it. We are convinced that we are free, that our choices are our own. But what if even our desires, ambitions, and dreams were carefully programmed? For us, the illusion of self begins in childhood, but it is refined and perfected by the systems that surround us. Governments, religions, and corporations do not simply respond to our identities. They manufacture them. They present us with pre-packaged roles to inhabit: the loyal citizen, the devout believer, the ambitious worker, the fashionable consumer. Each role promises protection from mortality. Each offers meaning, status, and the illusion of permanence. This is not an accident. It is the deliberate engineering of consciousness. In the early 20th century, Edward Bernays, known as the father of modern propaganda, discovered that human beings could be controlled not through reason, but through unconscious desires and fears. Drawing on the ideas of his uncle, Sigmund Freud, Bernays pioneered a system of mass persuasion that linked products, politics, and ideologies to the hidden anxieties of the human mind. He realized that if you could tap into the fear of insignificance, if you could whisper to the terror of death buried deep inside people, you could guide their choices without them ever noticing. It was Bernays who helped convince women to smoke cigarettes by branding them as torches of freedom, transforming a deadly habit into a symbol of liberation. It was Bernays who advised corporations and governments alike that the key to obedience was not truth, but the careful management of symbols and emotions. His techniques would go on to shape advertising, public relations, and political propaganda for the rest of the century, and they still define the modern world today. Carl Jung once said that modern man is in danger of becoming nothing more than a bundle of collective archetypes, identities imposed on him by the culture he inhabits. The warrior, the mother, the outcast, the hero. These timeless patterns dwell in the collective unconscious. But in the hands of marketers and politicians, they become tools of manipulation. Advertisements promise us we can embody the archetype of the rebel by buying a certain car, or the archetype of the lover by wearing a particular fragrance. Entire political movements rise by casting their followers into roles: the patriot, the defender, the chosen people. Each identity feels deeply personal, but in reality, it has been sold to us. The tragedy is that these identities exploit the deepest part of the human psyche. They reassure us that we belong to something larger than ourselves, that our lives matter in the face of death. But belonging comes at a cost. To remain inside the safety of the group, we are asked to conform, to obey, to consume endlessly. Our individuality is celebrated on the surface, but suppressed at its core. The self becomes less a unique reality, and more a character we are assigned to play. Look around at the modern world, and the psychological prison becomes clear. Media outlets bombard us with curated images of success, beauty, and wealth, each an unattainable standard designed to keep us restless, anxious, and consuming. Social media transforms identity into a marketplace, where worth is measured in likes, followers, and digital approval. Even our rebellion is commodified. The clothing, the music, the lifestyle that signal nonconformity are themselves mass-produced and sold back to us. This prison is powerful not because it cages our bodies, but because it colonizes our minds. The bars are invisible, built from narratives we accept without question. This is who you are. This is what life means. This is how you will be remembered. And like actors in a play we never auditioned for, we deliver the lines, believing them to be our own. But what happens when we realize the script was written for us? When the mask begins to crack, and we see that our identities are manufactured illusions. The unsettling truth emerges: if we are not who we think we are, and if society has programmed us with roles to keep us obedient and distracted, then who is really in control of our lives? That question lingers like a shadow, unsettling and unresolved, because to answer it requires us to confront not just the systems around us, but the possibility that we are strangers to ourselves. For most of human history, death has been seen as the great ending, the final curtain beyond which there is only silence. But scattered across cultures, across centuries, are stories that hint at something far stranger: that consciousness does not simply vanish when the body ceases to function. Instead, in those moments when the veil is thinnest, when life slips into death, some claim to glimpse an entirely different reality. These are the accounts of near-death experiences. They often begin the same way: the feeling of leaving one's body, watching from above, as doctors frantically work on the failing machine of flesh. A tunnel of light, an overwhelming sense of peace, visions of long-lost loved ones. For some, a panoramic review of their entire life unfolds in an instant, not just events, but the emotions felt by every person they ever touched. And then, just as suddenly, a return, a gasp, a heartbeat, a new awareness. To the skeptic, these accounts are dismissed as hallucinations, the byproduct of oxygen-starved brains. But to those who live through them, they are more real than reality itself. They return profoundly changed, their fear of death shattered, their sense of identity transformed. Many speak of realizing that they were never the body, never the ego, but something far vaster, something indivisible from all existence. Modern science has begun, cautiously, to investigate. At institutions like Johns Hopkins and Imperial College, London, researchers have turned to psychedelics, psilocybin, LSD, and DMT as tools for exploring consciousness. Volunteers often describe their experiences in strikingly similar terms to near-death survivors: a dissolution of the self, emerging with something infinite, an encounter with a reality that feels more fundamental than ordinary waking life. These journeys are not mere escapes into fantasy. Studies show they leave lasting changes, reductions in depression, anxiety, and fear of death. It is as if by temporarily dismantling the illusion of identity, people awaken to a truth that lingers even when the drug fades. Ancient traditions have long spoken of this. Buddhism teaches that the self is a construct, an impermanent mask obscuring the nature of reality. Liberation, or enlightenment, comes not from strengthening identity, but from seeing through it entirely. Hindu philosophy goes further, suggesting that beneath the individual self, or Atman, lies Brahman, the universal consciousness, eternal and unchanging, of which we are all expressions. In this view, death is not an ending, but a return, a dissolving of the illusion of separation into the ocean of being. Even Western philosophy has occasionally brushed against this truth. William James, the father of modern psychology, once wrote of mystical states as windows through which the mind looks out upon a more extensive and inclusive world. For James, such experiences could not be dismissed as mere delusion. They carried with them a noetic quality, a sense of deep knowledge that transcends language. Consider the case of Anita Moorjani, who in 2006 lay on her deathbed with terminal cancer. Slipping into a coma, she experienced what she described as an immersion in unconditional love, a realization of her interconnectedness with all existence. When she awoke, the cancer had begun to recede. Within weeks, her doctors could no longer find tumors in her body. Whether miracle, anomaly, or something science has yet to explain, her experience left her convinced that who we are is not confined to flesh and bone. Or take the countless reports from DMT sessions, where individuals describe entering a realm populated by entities, architectures, and intelligences that defy comprehension, while critics insist these are hallucinations generated by the brain. Others argue that the consistency of the reports suggests something deeper. Perhaps consciousness is not produced by the brain, but filtered through it, and psychedelics temporarily lift the veil. If identity is indeed an illusion, a mask worn for survival, for society, for the denial of death, then perhaps what remains when the mask dissolves is closer to the truth. Near-death experiences, mystical awakenings, psychedelic journeys all point to the same unsettling possibility, that consciousness cannot be reduced to neurons and synapses, that what we truly are cannot be measured, categorized, or destroyed, and if that is so, then death is not the end at all. It is a transition, a return, a revelation. The fear that has governed human life, the terror that built empires and religions, may rest upon a false assumption. What if death is not our annihilation, but the unveiling of what we always were? This question does not erase the mystery, it deepens it. But within that mystery lies a strange kind of hope, the possibility that our true self is not something that can die, but something eternal, waiting for us beyond the illusion of identity throughout history. Certain individuals have dared to pierce through the veil of identity, to look directly at the machinery of the mind in the shadow of death. They emerged with a message not of comfort, but of liberation, that the self we cling to so desperately is not who we are. To awaken is to dismantle the prison of illusion, and though it feels like annihilation, it is in truth the beginning of freedom. The mystic, Gurdjieff, warned that most people move through life asleep, mechanical beings repeating patterns implanted by society. To him, awakening was not a luxury or a spiritual hobby, but a matter of life and death. If we do not wake up, he said, we remain puppets, our strings pulled by fears, desires, and external forces we never truly chose. His method was radical, self-observation, to watch one's own thoughts, impulses, and emotions as if they belonged to a stranger. By doing this, a person begins to see the false personality for what it is, a construction, a mask. Centuries later, Alan Watts echoed the same insight in a language suited for the modern West. He described the ego as a hallucination, a social convention mistaken for reality. The tragedy, he said, is that people believe themselves to be isolated fragments in a hostile universe, when, in truth, they are inseparable from the very fabric of existence. Watts insisted that death is not the great terror we imagine, but the dissolution of a boundary that was never real to begin with. Then came Eckhart Tolle, who spoke from his own nightmarish confrontation with despair. One evening, overwhelmed by depression and the desire to end his life, he heard within himself the thought, "I cannot live with myself any longer." That sentence, he realized, contained a puzzle. Who was the I, and who was the self? It could no longer endure. In that moment, the false identity collapsed. What remained was presence, silent, aware, untouched by fear. From that night onward, he lived not as a bundle of anxious thoughts, but as consciousness itself. Though their voices differ, the core of their message is the same. Identity is a dream, and to wake up we must see through it. But this awakening does not come from wishful thinking. It demands confrontation with the very things we flee from, our mortality, our programming, our deepest fears. Meditation, in this sense, is not simply relaxation or stress relief. It is an act of rebellion against illusion. When one sits quietly and observes the mind, they quickly discover how little control they truly have. Thoughts rise and fall unbidden. Memories intrude. Emotions surge. To witness this chaos without judgment is to realize that the self is not the author of experience. It is merely another object within awareness. Over time, the grip of identity loosens, and what remains is the silent observer, untouched by the turbulence it beholds. Self-inquiry takes the process further. In traditions like Advaita, Vedanta, the seeker asks, "Who am I?" Not in search of an intellectual answer, but to peel back each layer of illusion. I am not the body, for the body ages and dies. I am not my thoughts, for they come and go without my command. I am not my roles, my history, my reputation, for all of these shift with time. So what remains when every mask is stripped away? The question leads not to an answer, but to a direct recognition that awareness itself is what we are, vast and formless, beyond birth and death. To awaken is terrifying. It feels like death, because the ego interprets its dissolution as annihilation. But countless seekers have testified that on the other side of this surrender lies something astonishing: freedom. The fear of death loses its grip. The compulsive chase for validation, wealth, or legacy begins to crumble. What emerges is a life lived with authenticity, rooted not in the fragile story of me, but in the unshakable presence of being. And yet, awakening does not remove us from the world. It deepens our connection to it. When the illusion of separation falls, compassion arises naturally. We see ourselves and others, not as a noble moral duty, but as an undeniable truth. To harm another becomes as absurd as harming our own hand. This is why every genuine awakening leads not to isolation, but to service, creativity, and love. The challenge, however, is that society does not reward awakening. A person who sees through illusion cannot be easily manipulated, sold to, or controlled. This is why most people remain asleep. It is safer, more comfortable, to live within the dream. But for those who dare, the possibility remains. Perhaps this is the final paradox. By confronting death, by dismantling the identity we thought was our life, we discover the only thing that truly cannot die. The false self collapses, but what shines through is more real than anything we have ever known. So the question lingers, haunting and hopeful. Will we continue playing the role society has scripted for us? Or will we risk everything, comfort, certainty, even the sense of who we are, to awaken? Because in the end, the path to freedom is not about becoming someone new. It is about realizing we were never who we thought we were. From the beginning, humanity has lived under a spell, the spell of identity, the spell of death, the spell of a story whispered into our ears until we mistake it for reality. We call it the self, but it is little more than a mask stitched together from memory, culture, language, and fear. And now, at the end of this journey, the truth emerges with unsettling clarity. You are not who you think you are. The roles we play, parent, worker, citizen, believer, skeptic, are costumes. They are borrowed scripts written long before we were born. Our sense of I is shaped by parents, schools, governments, religions, and corporations. We are told what to value, what to desire, what to fear. Yet beneath the noise of this programming lies something that has never changed, something that has been with us since the very first breath. That silent awareness, the witness of every thought and sensation, is who we truly are. Even death, that greatest of terrors, reveals its secret when approached without illusion. We spend our lives building monuments against it, pyramids, cathedrals, empires, fortunes, reputations. We bury ourselves in work, in legacy, in distraction, believing that if our name survives, we will not truly die. But what if this desperate grasping blinds us to a deeper reality? Death is not the enemy of life. It is the completion of it. The inhale cannot exist without the exhale. The wave cannot rise without eventually falling back into the ocean. Life and death are not opposites, but partners in a single, eternal rhythm. And if the self is only a story, then what dies when the body perishes? The persona, the ego, the fragile mask of me that dissolves. But awareness, that timeless presence behind all experience, was never born and therefore cannot end. Mystics, philosophers, and those who have touched the edge of death all point to this same revelation, that what we are is not a thing, but the very field in which all things appear and disappear. Consider how every moment of your life has unfolded. Thoughts arise, feelings come and go, Sensations flicker like sparks in the night. Yet through it all, there is something constant, the quiet fact of being aware. You may change names, beliefs, careers, even entire personalities, but this fundamental awareness remains untouched. It is the one thing you have never lost, and it is not yours alone. It is not the possession of an individual self. It is the ground of reality itself, wearing a mask called you for a fleeting moment in time. This realization is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it strips away everything we thought we were, the identity we defended, the legacy we tried to build, the illusions we clung to, all revealed as temporary. But liberating because what remains is indestructible. No society can program it. No propaganda can distort it. No death can erase it. So we arrive at the final revelation. We are not our identities, our careers, our social roles, or our fears. We are not the stories we tell ourselves or the lies the world tells us. We are not the fragile characters endlessly seeking meaning in a chaotic play. We are the stage itself, the screen upon which every image of life and death is projected. And once this is seen, even faintly, life changes. The urgency to prove ourselves begins to dissolve. The fear of death loosens its grip. Compassion arises not as a moral obligation, but as a natural recognition that the same awareness looking out from your eyes is looking out from mine. Every boundary softens. Every moment becomes sacred, not because it is permanent, but because it is fleeting. Perhaps the greatest illusion of all is that awakening is something distant, something to be achieved after years of striving. In truth, it is here, now, in this very moment of listening. Awakening is not the acquisition of something new, but the recognition of what has always been. The awareness that is hearing these words is the same awareness that was present in your childhood, in every joy, in every sorrow, in every breath. It is what remains when everything else is stripped away. So let us return to the question that began this journey. Who are you? Really, the shocking, liberating truth is that you are not who you think you are. You are not the mask, not the story, not the fleeting shadow. You are the timeless presence in which every mask, every story, every shadow comes and goes. And when the final curtain falls, when the body exhales for the last time, that presence will not vanish, for it was never born, and it can never die. This is the haunting, empowering gift hidden within the illusion. You are already free,